Alright, I did like a quick video on the deck that I bought, Apparition Tarot. That might go up before this, it might go after this. Anyway, I mentioned towards the end of that video about these fraudulent decks and how like people be really buying them. Like it's like, what? And I mean, I get it. So tarot is one of those places where you can rack up a lot of debt, or you can like rack up a lot of like expenses, excuse me, really quickly, because people like new decks, they like brand new decks, they like out of print decks, and they have a desire to like purchase these things. They have a desire to kind of keep up with trends when it comes to deck trends, when it comes to like themes, when it comes to like various topics of diversity. They like to try things out and things like that. I kind of find that people in tarot with the huge deck collections, this may be the only thing that they like do large collections of. Some people are just collectors in general. I have found that I am someone who doesn't really have a lot of clothes, doesn't really have a lot of books, I kind of can go either way with skincare, but I personally don't mind tarot being my category, that I just like spend like a bunch of fucking money on, because I have like over 100 decks, so that's like way over $1,000 right there, way over, that I've like spent since like 2017, right? For the last, we're in 2022, 2023, the last 6 years, over 100 decks. And this is not counting, this is the decks that I've bought and like sold or gotten rid of, and then the decks I currently have. So pretty much, if we're counting all of the decks total, I've probably had closer to 150-ish, 175-ish decks, because I definitely sold like a bunch when I was like 2019, 2021, somewhere in there, because I just didn't like those decks anymore. I just felt like they weren't for me, and a lot of them weren't for me. They were decks that I had purchased kind of like when I was starting out, and you know, the people that you like to watch do tarot readings, and the people I watch now are very different from the people I started watching tarot tube on or with or whatever, but admiring their readings, the decks that they were reading with, I was like, oh, okay, I like these, it seems like this is a pretty popular deck. I ended up buying them, and they just ended up, a lot of them, the first few decks that I got ended up not being for me. So there's that. And yeah, a lot of the decks that I bought in the beginning are not with me, to be honest, because a lot of them were different traditions that, like, not to be rude, but I really don't want to learn about, and I don't care about, like druidry and like Wicca, like pagan, like I'm an animist, but like I don't want to really learn about none of this. I don't really want to learn about runes. I don't want to learn about the green man. I don't want to learn about like the owl of whatever, you know, Irish, UK, Great British, like region. Like I don't, you know, I'm not interested in Nordic, I'm not interested in like Germanic, I'm not interested in like, I'm not interested Slavic, I'm not interested in any of that shit. Not to be rude, but I'm not interested in any of that. So it's not because I'm black, it's just like the more I delve into this, I'm really not interested. I actually am getting more interested in more African traditions, but even that, I'm like, there's very specific systems I'm interested in. It's not like everything at large, right? So there's how I've grown and developed. But back to these decks, when you're doing a lot of purchasing and things like that, and especially if you have a YouTube channel where you showcase a lot of decks, this could be you showcase decks as in you're showing them when you're reading, or you literally are kind of a deck collection review channel, because some people specifically kind of like lean towards more of that as opposed to like reading for other people. Like they read for themselves, but they have quite a large collection, and they just kind of show you what their process is when it comes to journaling, when it comes to meditation, and how basically what their practice is. There's people who are readers for others and themselves. There's people who are readers for themselves, but they kind of let you into what their practice is. And I find that these two groups tend to have a lot of decks. And some people, I mean, I guess they're just hoarders or whatever, and they just like go along with it. But most people, I tend to find, fall into one of those. They either read like professionally or for other people from time to time, and they have a large collection because they work with a lot of people, and they need kind of a larger collection maybe to do that work. Or people read for themselves, but they have a quite active, for the most part, spiritual practice. So when you have these decks and you want to get these decks, and they get expensive because some decks are really out here being like $100, 80 to maybe the highest ones I see are between like $80 and $200, depending on what deck it is. Out of print decks are usually expensive as shit. Very expensive, very like, oh my god, like, you know, and very expensive and very much, they just gonna cost you because they're out of print and nobody has them. And with stuff like that, you got to be wary of sourcing. So for me, I used to use eBay a lot. I did use Amazon, but I definitely was an eBay kind of girl, and Barnes and Noble. So in person, Barnes and Noble. I never really order anything offline Barnes and Noble, but I would go in person and go to the Barnes and Noble. So I would go there, get my stuff. And a lot of the more recognizable decks that we know would be in that section. Right? Like the ones on Jewelry, Wiccan, stuff like that. And the more mainstream decks tend to be at like a Barnes & Noble. eBay was a place that I could find like decks that may be out of print or a little bit harder to find. Maybe they've done like 3 runs of it, but the last run was in like 07 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, just a little bit harder to find, or very niche kind of decks. And that's where you start to run into trouble, especially also with Amazon, and now especially with like Etsy, because Etsy, jumping around here, but Etsy used to be one of those places where like I feel like you could really I don't want to say connect with the creator of the deck. That's not what I mean as far as like you can communicate back and forth, because that would be more of an Instagram, Facebook type thing, YouTube thing, where they let you into the process or whatever. But I kind of started to feel like these spaces just become overran with like these fake decks, these clearly like, I mean, clearly botched kind of decks. And I get the price point, but what I don't like when it comes to the tarot spaces, people, I mean, I get that this deck is expensive, but my thing is, it's not even, sometimes the deck is like $20. And people just really don't want to spend the money on the artwork, and they don't want to spend the money on basically you're paying for the process of it being from like ideation to like actual manifestation, 3D manifestation. And this is an arena, if you want to cut corners on that, cool. Because not everyone uses tarot in the same way, but I would advise you to be careful. And not because, oh, the deck gets botched and you look at it and the coloring's off. I mean, literally you could go to the wrong seller and like your shit gets stolen, your information gets stolen and stuff like that. Not that it can't happen on like the personal page, the personal website of like the seller on their website. Not that it can't happen through Kickstarter, like it gets hacked. But what I would caution you against would be to try and do these shortcuts on these like clearly dodgy, sketchy, you know this is low cost, low price type website. If you need to save up for a deck, if you want to do things, I would try and do them on the up and up, because you really, I mean, you are paying money with this kind of stuff, and you really do want to receive what you're paying for. And I stopped doing Etsy a lot because I realized when I would order stuff, I would get it, but I've had 2 times where I've ordered something and they were missing a card. And it wasn't like, from the website, but I was missing a fucking card of from the person just selling the deck. They didn't count the cards, they didn't do anything, they just shipped it out. And I'm paying money for this. And now I am out money because it's not like I can just get it refunded, or it's going to take a long process. And that's another thing with really sketchy websites. Like, if you can't get your money back, if you don't hear any correspondence from them, like, you're just pretty much ass out and you got to eat the loss. So I've eaten the loss on 2 decks, and I'm over Etsy for the most part. I kind of also just find that people, I don't know, I kind of feel like they try to make a quick buck on Etsy. It's kind of getting scammerish. And eBay. Etsy, there is no shame in these like weird reproduction companies like game on those. Like, there's no shame. Like, the real deck is $45, but you can get it for like 10, and it's just like, it's clearly counterfeit. And that desire to be so included in the loop, so included like in the tarot space of, you have these decks that you would be willing to go to more counter, like, even weird companies. Like, I don't know, like, you got to start looking at yourself and why you feel like you need to go down that route to kind of impress people that for the most part probably don't care nearly as much. Like, a lot of the people that we're trying to get on TarotTube and stuff like that are really just passing through. There's only a certain core group that's gonna like kind of transition with you through various stages, but for the most part people are just passing through, and there's no need to kind of say I got the new coolest deck, especially if it's counterfeit, and especially if you've also stretched yourself beyond your financial limits to kind of get these decks. So it's kind of twofold. I would be very wary of the websites that you're going to if you're going to get like the counterfeit. If you feel like, I really want this deck but I can't afford it, I'm willing to go to the reproduction website. Just make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you kind of have someone to call or backup just in case. Make sure you do receive the deck. Make sure you got everything, because it could be really shysty on that end. Yeah, so if you want to go that route, I kind of find it hard to justify. I'm gonna just be real. As somebody who wants to get into doing art, I kind of understand the creatives' frustration that people kind of want this thing that you created, but they don't want to pay you. They would be willing to pay someone who is kind of dubious origins to get the thing they want. And it's kind of like, well, the person who spent years in art school or spent years focusing on this, putting this together, getting the symbolism, like, you don't think they should be paid for that? You don't think they should be paid? I mean, they're the one that has to contact. I feel like the more, I guess my Saturn is picking in, but the more that I actually look into like owning a business, I understand that like these are really tough decisions on the business end that have to be made to actually bring a profit, right? They have to sell a certain amount of decks. They have to pay this amount to have a certain quality for the paper. They have to have a certain budget for the coloring to make sure that it's pretty consistent across decks. If you're doing 300 runs a day, making sure that the ink is kind of consistent. They have to do these things, and it does factor in to the cost. And I would just kind of check yourself if you really feel like you have to have something but you're not willing to pay for it. Even on Etsy, if you want to do payment plans, you can do Klarna or whatever. Yeah, I've done that, and only because I really just didn't want to pay it at the moment. I was just like, I just don't feel like it. But that could be something that's considered detrimental to people too, like putting in a payment plan. Because how essential is any of this stuff? Not really. We're talking about really non-essential things, right? You can't eat a tarot deck. You can sell it for cash to get the food, but you can't eat a tarot deck. You can't sleep on that, right? You can't wear it. So it is a matter of priority. So places I do recommend, like independent bookshops. I would follow a lot of the independent bookshops. I would follow, and they do markups because they have to make a profit. So it's the deck's price plus whatever markup they need to make whatever money they can do. Just know if you're going through an independent bookshop or any shop in general that's going to wholesale it, they have to bump up the price. So you can either go directly from the artists themselves, figure out what their website is, make sure you're following the right accounts on social media so you don't get led on to like a fuck ass website. Kickstarter, if you want to look on there, just double check the like artist origins and shit like that. Etsy, but make sure it's the proper shop if you're gonna do it like that. Bookstores, spiritual shops, things like that, where you can maybe go in and physically see them in front of you. You may get very limited selection because of that. And then Amazon, but just make sure the shop that you're going to is kind of like legit, because they also, when it comes to posting pictures, they'll take pictures from like other places and put them on their shop display, and then it can fool you into thinking you're getting something that you're not. Like, I've done that, and the deck itself, I mean, I also did read the descriptions, and that's another thing. Make sure you're reading the dimensions. Make sure you're reading the dimensions of the deck. So like this, like somewhere online, this deck is probably being sold as a counterfeit. And one of the main things that changes in counterfeit decks is the size. So usually the size becomes like the regular tuck box kind of size, like something you would find with Low Scarabeo, right? Or Llewellyn, the ones with the flaps and stuff like that. It changes the size, which also changes the dimensions. Usually the color quality is not as good, paper quality is not as good, linen quality, whatever. So I would just make sure you know your origins and reevaluate if you need as many decks as you know, what is it about these decks? What is it about having these decks that, should you not have them, is so disturbing to you, right? Like, I mean, real, I've known about this deck for like years, at least like 2 years, and I'm just getting it, you know, like, it is what it is. Just reevaluate what you're doing, because you don't want to get in a landmine where your like bank accounts and shit like that are like tied in with all of this, you know? Just make sure that you really want the decks, you're willing to pay for the decks, and I would implore you to have respect enough for the actual maker to buy directly from them or somewhere that they wholesale to, just because if you're on the other end of that as an artist and you know what it's like to sell something that you have made, just take that into consideration. Even if you're a consumer, what that person has to go through should anyone steal their artwork, should anyone reproduce it, should anyone sell things with their likeness or whatever art likeness that they have created. Just understand. And it's also going to be a really shisty world out here. I think Age of Aquarius is really going to be like the age of the scammer. It's already the age of the cults. I just feel like it's going to be the age of the cult, and it's going to be the age of the scammer. And we have to be, it's also an age of discernment. So be aware out in this bitch. Just saying. Thank you for watching. This was way longer than I thought it was going to be. Watch the whole video. Don't be a butthole. But yeah, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.